Good afternoon, everybody. It is Wednesday the 13th of June. Apologies for the delay in the podcast this week, but I'm not complaining, but I've had people coming round to visit me, so all the times I was going to record on Monday and on Tuesday, I had visitors instead, so I've decided this afternoon you have me. I say afternoon, it's about 5 o'clock in the late afternoon, early evening now. We've had some very warm weather the last week or so, and it's quite close and claggy, but I've got the windows open and there's a bit of a breeze coming through, so hopefully I won't be perspiring too much and the light bouncing off my head. Introductions. My name is Gerard, or Peter, or Boniface, depending upon where you are in the world. I live in Abingdon-on-Thames in Oxfordshire, in the southeast of England. A small town that's about 7 miles due south of the city of Oxford. I live with my two cats, Toby and Bunty, who I'm sure will make an appearance at some point, and my flatmate, who is at work this afternoon and evenings. He's on a late shift, so he won't be around to disturb us. Not that he ever does, but he's working at the moment, driving to and from London. And I crochet and knit and weave and spin and sew and do anything that's related to the fibre arts. So welcome back everybody who has been with us before, and welcome especially to any new viewers, and I hope you enjoy spending some time with me. And if you do, I've got lots of videos going back over the last more or less 18 months now, so I think there's lots there for you to enjoy. I will give you all an update. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, and there's a link in the description below for that, you'll be aware that poor Toby wasn't very well last week. When I was recording on Monday, it was Bunty that was butting in. He's just below me at the moment, so he knows what I'm talking about him. It was Toby that butted in. Sorry, it was Bunty that butted in. Toby, unfortunately, we had well, on the Monday, he was very much lying in a small corner of the room between two chairs, a chair and a sofa in the sitting room. And every time I touched him, he cried. So it was clear that something was wrong. So I took him to the vet, my local vet's just around the corner, and his bladder was very full, and he was obviously having difficulty passing water. So there is a common condition for male cats in particular, which is crystals in the bladder, which can then block the urethra, and if not treated promptly can be life-threatening. So I had to book him in with the vets for 2 nights while they did observations and treated him and took tests and that kind of thing. And ultimately he didn't require surgery, which is a great blessing, and he came home on the Thursday. So I took him in on Tuesday, he came home on the Thursday. I had to take him back on the Friday for a checkup, so there was about 36 hours between me bringing him home and taking him back in. And the good news is he doesn't have an infection, he doesn't have any crystals in his urine. He has a slight kink in his urethra. And we had a big celebration on Saturday in Abingdon, which included fireworks at 10 o'clock at night. And because of where I am in relation to the Abbey Meadows, which are just over to my right, and they were very big fireworks, the buildings to my left in the courtyard area outside my flat reverberate the sound back, and it was incredibly loud. And it appears that he got stressed by that, had a muscle spasm around his urethra, and that it couldn't relax and it couldn't unblock itself. So I've been giving him anti-inflammatories and a diuretic medication, and it's worked perfectly, and he is pretty much back to normal. He is running around and being mischievous and getting into all kinds of things. He's sitting right in front of me looking at me. He knows I'm talking about him. He has 3 patches of bare skin at the moment where they had to shave his fur in order to put in IV lines and that kind of thing, and drain his bladder. So he's not really bothered about them. He's not worrying them or irritating them while he's grooming. So he seems pretty much back to normal. The conclusion of this little tale is that they handed me a bill on Friday for £999.86, which is, you know, £1,000 shy of 14 pence. So fortunately I have pet insurance, so I only had to pay the £80 excess, and they were able to make a direct claim, so I didn't have to pay. My insurer, I might have had to pay up front and then claim the money back, but my insurer said they were happy to settle the claim direct with the vet, and the vet was happy to deal with that as well. So all in all, not too expensive a time for me, and actually not that expensive a time for my insurer really, because over the 10 years I've had Toby and Bunty, I must have paid them about £4,000 or £5,000 in insurance premiums, so they're still quids in on the deal. But the good news is Toby's back to normal. Bunty was slightly miffed when he returned because I think she was quite enjoying having me to herself, but they're fine again now, so everything is hunky-dory in the Huddleston household. So, I am today, excuse me, I will just speak briefly about my tea. I'm drinking the gingerbread tea, so if you'll pardon me, I'll just take a sip. Oh, it's just so like gingerbread in my mouth. But the real reason I wanted to talk about my tea is because I've been going to Willow's Shake Shop, which is our local milkshake shop in town, and Jeanette, who is the proprietress, and Claire, who is one of her primary assistants in the shop, have become very good friends. They're both crafters themselves, and we have a good old chinwag when I pop in, and it's always nice to see them. Well, Claire has been knitting tea cozies for sale in the shop, because I was talking to Jeanette about this yesterday, and part of the planning permission for it to be a milkshake shop was that it also had to be a retail environment, because the council didn't want to lose another retail space to simply a cafe. And so that's one of the reasons why Jeanette sells local handmade crafts in the shop, because it fulfills the planning permission. And Claire knits tea cozies for larger teapots. So I said I'd love one of her tea cozies, but I only have a teapot for one, because there's no point making tea for 4 people when it's just me. But the thing is, my teapot for one allows me to have 2 cups of tea. So by the time I've drunk the first cup of tea, when it's down to a drinking temperature, the second cup of tea is gone down to the same temperature in the pot. So she went away last night and knit me from scratch this adorable strawberry tea cozy. And it's absolutely perfect fit, Claire. She watches this podcast, so she'll be delighted that I'm showing it. It is, I hope you can see these little beads, pearlescent beads are the seeds of the strawberry. And it is absolutely a perfect fit. So thank you very much, Claire. It's keeping my second cup of tea lovely and warm. This is Bunty, by the way. I think if I just, as you can see, there we are. There's my little Bunty. Black and white cat, like Postman Pat. So my second cup of tea will be just as warm as my first cup of tea when I finally get to drink it. So thank you very much, Claire. So without any further ado, I've talked about Toby. I've talked about my wonderful gift from Claire. So I think now is the time for me to get on and talk about all things going on in my craft life. So I do have a finished object, kind of. I have finished the Tower Bridge filet crochet. I think what I'll need to do, I say it's a finished object. It isn't really, because I will be putting it on a background, and when I hold it up you'll see why, because now you can actually see the lovely filet crochet against the blue background, and I think a blue background will work extremely well with this. So my intention is to back the filet crochet and then put the whole thing into a picture frame and put it on the wall, or maybe as a gift for somebody, I'm not sure yet. Maybe I'll make another one. So this was made using DMC cotton, a size 40, which I have here. So that's their size 40 cotton. I hope you're getting, if I move that way you might be able to see it better. I don't know, but I'll put it on the screen anyway. And as you can see, it's very fine cotton, and my 1mm crochet hook, which is here. So it's kind of a finished object, but kind of not quite finished at the same time. So I suppose it's rather like a sock, a half-finished object. So we'll call it an HO or an HFO. And that's it. So as you can see, it's the Tower Bridge design with suspension cables on the left and the right, and secondary piers holding those up, and the bridge going across the middle, and then this wavy line at the bottom indicating the river. So I was very pleased with that. It's turned out as well as I'd hoped. In fact, I took it into Mason's. I actually took it in because I was showing Jeanette and Claire in Willows, but I went next door into Mason's and showed it them as well, and I was complimented on the stitch definition, so I was very pleased with that. So this blue background is what I will be attaching. This blue is just a poly cotton. It's what I used to back one of my 2 Christmas table runners. So if you go back to my Christmas episode, you'll see this in action in a different format. And on the subject of half-finished objects, obviously I talked about my Christmas tree filet crochet last time, which is, for those of you who don't recall, is this lovely object. I went with Wendy to Mason's, as you do, well, as I do, and this is the background that we selected in the end. It's a lovely bright red. We did try a number of different greens and reds, but this was the one that in the end that we decided worked best. And it was very useful having a second pair of eyes to see that. So if I hold this up against it, you'll get some impression of it, even if it's not a full impression. So if you just bear with me while I open the fabric out. There we are, let's open it at that end. That's going to be easier. And then pick this up at that end. That's the bottom, so the top is here. There we are, we get there in the end. So I hope you can see that actually this red in the back of the ecru is going to look really quite nice. So that's going to be probably a wall hanging, I've decided. And I'm very pleased with the way it looks, and I'm very pleased and grateful to Wendy for coming and casting a weathered eye over the whole thing as well, because it really does help to get a second opinion straight away. So that's what I've finished this week. I have got a number of whips that I've been working on as well. I'm just wondering what's the best order to do this in. In for a penny, in for a pound. Might as well just jump straight in. So I'll talk about my new whip. Will I? Yes, I might as well. So on Instagram, I follow a designer whose name is Not Bad. His name is actually Vincent, but his username is not KNOT.bad, B-A-D. And I'll put the information for you. And he has just designed, he designs mostly so far amigurumi and hats with kind of amigurumi appendages. So some wearables, but of the hat and scarf variety rather than cardigans and so on. But he has just published his first design for a wearable that's not simply a hat or scarf, and it's this cardigan which he has called the Blood Moon cardigan. And I think it's a very attractive, stylish, kind of loose-fitting robe. It's designed for beginners. It's a very simple construction. I don't want to say too much about the construction because it is a paid-for pattern, and he is a new designer and trying to build an audience for his productions. So I don't want to say too much, but it ends up with this lovely border that goes around the back of the neck, down the sides, and around the back at the bottom, and then back up. So it's a continuous poncho style construction, I guess. The level is very much that of a beginner, so this is not a difficult pattern to make. And I have started, and I won't be giving too much away. I love the black and the red as a colour contrast. It's a very powerful kind of statement, but they're not really colours that I would wear on a regular basis. And he also is sponsored by Lion Brand Yarns, which is a very good brand of yarn, and he has chosen to make that cardigan in acrylic. Whereas I wanted a cardigan that I could wear. I get very hot, and wearing a plastic cardigan, no matter how soft an acrylic, it remains a non-breathable fabric. So I wouldn't want to wear an acrylic top because I'd just get very sweaty very quickly. So I have swapped it out for cotton and linen. And so this is how far I've got so far. So the red on his design I've swapped out for this pale green, and the black for this pale blue. And I mean, I'll just put it around my neck so you'll get some feel of how it will look, but that's basically how it will look once it's done. Obviously there's a lot more to be done to it, and as I say, I won't be saying too much about the construction. It's mostly double crochets for those who follow US terms, and it's a very simple, almost mindless construction. I'm using, to make this, two different yarns. The pale blue is the Cloudborne Fibres Pima Cotton DK. This, and it's 100% cotton. Just make sure before I misinform you of anything. I believe it's 100% cotton. Yes, 100% Pima cotton. And it's, I like Cloudborne. For those of you who watch the Grocery Girls and who saw them on Craftsy recently, I'm sorry if my picture is out of focus at the moment. It may be my eyes, but it just looks a little bit out of focus behind me, but I don't know, so I'll just carry on, and if it is, I'm sorry about that. That's better, it's come back into focus now. It may be my screen rather than the actual focusing, so don't worry if it is wrong. I've made, so for those of you who watched the Grocery Girls on Craftsy, their Off Our Needles series, this latest series with the mini episodes, they were making a novelty sweater, which is for a woman. It's a woman's sweater. It's kind of tunic, but it's made horizontally instead of vertically, so the knit stitches go sideways. But I quite like the cotton that they were using, so I went online and I ordered the cotton anyway from Craftsy, because I made previously the Scania shawl for my friend Louisa in their Highland Twist sock, I think it was, yarn, which I really enjoyed using. It was a really nice yarn. So having used their yarn once, I wanted to try them again. I love this cotton. It's incredibly soft. It's very easy to use. It doesn't have that toughness that some cottons can have. And so far, it hasn't been splitting either. The other yarn I used is from Mirasol and is a 60% cotton, 40% linen yarn. So it's going to be a little bit, it is a little bit stronger. It's still very soft, but it's a little bit stronger. And I thought it would work better on as the outside edge, because that's the bit that's going to get the most wear and tear, because that's the bit that is going to be used to pull on and off. So having a slightly tougher yarn is probably not a bad thing anyway, but it's certainly a wearable. It's very soft against the skin, so I'm not worried about that at all. This I got because it was on special offer at Mason's. They excuse me, terribly sorry about that. If that's too loud, I'll cut it out anyway. This was on sale along with a number of cotton yarns at Mason's for the last week or so, and I'm always one for a good bargain, so I picked up a number of hanks of this yarn and a couple of others that I'll talk about in a moment. So those are the two DK weight yarns that I'm using for this project. I'll just pop those back. I want to talk about the hook that I'm using. Again, those of you who follow me on Instagram will already know about this hook, but I was browsing through Etsy a few weeks ago and I alighted upon a page called Knittingberg or Knittingborough, I guess. It depends. It's spelt Knittingberg, B-U-R-G, but I'm guessing it's Knittingborough, in fact, as the way it's pronounced. But whichever way, this is the branding, and I hope you can see that. And this person is also known as Irina's Pearl on Instagram, and again I'll put that down at the bottom. And she is a dyer and does various other things, but she also sells, I don't know whether she makes, but she certainly sells hand-turned crochet hooks. This is made from cherry wood and is a 5mm hook. And I have to say, I've used it so far for making this. This is how I hold my hooks. So it's the perfect kind of shape for me to hold it comfortably as I'm working. I know other people hold hooks like that, and that's fine. I think it would still work because it's nestled nicely in there, and it's just got that slightly thicker body that makes it easier to hold onto than the simple metal hooks. She also does metal ended hooks that have got wooden handles as well, but I quite like this. It's made from cherry wood, as I say, and it's a fascinating thing to use natural fibres, natural materials such as wood, because as you use it, it actually warms up in your hand and becomes even more pleasant and comfortable to hold. And obviously oils from my hand will pass as I'm working into the wood and will give it a lovely patina as the months and years go by. She currently only has 6mm and 6.5mm, as well as the 5mm hook on sale, but she has previously stocked others, so I will be messaging her to see whether or not she has any others. These hooks cost £14 a piece, so they're not cheap, but they are beautifully made and they are not very expensive either. And so as not necessarily to have the full range that I have with my metal hooks, but maybe to have a 4mm and a 4.5mm and the 6mm, which are the four hooks that I tend to use most, depending upon whether I'm using a DK or an Aran weight, or maybe some DKs seem to be thinner than other DKs, which is why I sometimes go down to 4.5 or 4, and depending upon whether I'm making amigurumi, where I want a tight kind of dense stitch, in which case I'll use a smaller hook size in order to achieve the close stitching. But I can thoroughly recommend this. I've been using this now for a couple of months, as I say. Sorry, a couple of weeks since I bought it, about 3-4 weeks ago, I think. And it came almost straight away, and I got this lovely little handmade card. I'll not show the message, but inside the card it has a lovely dried flower as well. So that was a nice little additional touch, a thank you for the purchase. So I can thoroughly recommend her for those of you who are based in the UK, and maybe for those who don't mind paying international postage as well. I can thoroughly recommend her shop. Her yarns look lovely as well, but I can really recommend these wooden crochet hooks. So there we are. That's my Blood Moon card. I keep wanting to call it Bloodstone. I don't know why. It's the Blood Moon cardigan by Not Bad. And that's safe and sound in my hand-woven and handmade little sack with my branding on it. So that's it's nice and comfortable in there. It's just the right size. There's a couple of hanks in there. I've got the cardigan in there and the hook and the row counter and a few other bits and pieces that I need. So that's a nice size little sack. So that's one of my works in progress. A second work in progress, excuse me Toby, there we go. He's just lying to the side, but he was just slightly on. I think I showed a picture. Wendy has already made one of these. When we went to Newbury, it was, just before, in fact the day I went into hospital, so 7 weeks ago. Yes, it was 7 weeks ago last Saturday, so nearly 8 weeks ago now. Oh, hello, Bunty. Sorry, she just stuck her claws right into my knee. Oh, that was a bit painful. There we go. Yes, you can sit down if you like. There we go. Do you want to sit down? No, you want to stand up. Okay, you stand up. So Wendy and I, and Bob, and Wendy's sister as well, went to Newbury on a magical mystery tour, and we bought some fabric which I've previously shown. Have I shown it on here? Did I show it on here? Yes, I showed it last time. I did. I remember now. We also bought a ball of yarn and a pattern, because hanging up in the wool area of the shop was this actual cardigan. And we both thought immediately, Wendy's expecting a grandchild, I think in 2 months' time, maybe 3. I think so. I'm expecting another great nephew next month. And also a good friend is having a baby the month after. So we've both got babies in our lives at the moment. So she's already made this cardigan and I've shown it. I think she made the slightly larger version. Or she may have made... I can't remember if she made the round neck one or the V-necked cardigan. I'm making the round necked cardigan and I'm making it for a newborn. And I had forgotten how tiny newborns actually are. So far I have completed the back, which has this lovely intermittent garter bump design. And I've made the left-hand side. I only started this, when was it? I started it. I was watching the Formula 1 on Sunday night and I didn't work on it yesterday. So this I did on Sunday. And Monday morning, amongst other things. At the moment, I'm flitting between projects. I'm doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I currently have the right-hand side. I've done basically the ribbing at the bottom and just started on the main bodywork. So this is being worked. The ribbing is worked on a 3.5mm needle. And the main body is worked on a 4mm needle, and this is a newborn size, and it is tiny. I mean, it will fit a newborn baby, but it is incredibly tiny. It's funny how you forget how small newborn babies are because they grow so quickly. And the yarn that I'm using is James Brett, the same as the pattern, and it's called their Baby Marble. Which is a self-patterning yarn. As you can see, it's got these lovely spring colours of yellow and green running through it. And the pooling is delicious. I mean, it really is attractive. And this is 100% acrylic, so it won't have any allergy reaction in the child. And being a baby yarn, it is so soft. It's so beautiful. So I'm together with the, I've got to buy still the trouser and top, kind of newborn baby clothes to go with the cotton jacket that I've already made, the matinee jacket I've made already. So I need to get that this week, in fact, and I'll finish this week, and so that will be a finished project next week. I think this cost £2.20, £2.30, something like that. Very inexpensive yarn, and I'm certainly I'll be able to make at least 2 of them from this 100-gram ball. So there we go. There we are, Wendy. I called it a ball even though it's a skein. So that's the second work in progress. I have done a little bit on my socks. So these are moving on. I've done another inch on the foot. And this tends to be something I do if I'm just to idle away an hour or so. I'll just do, because it's 2 at a time. It's fairly mindless. It's a repeated 2-row pattern to make this lovely pattern, broken rib kind of pattern on the front. And it's a very relaxing little knit, and I'll soon be ready to turn the heel. This is using the Signet Yarns Truly Rich Wool, which is, I think, I think is a 60% wool and... No, it's 50% wool, I think, and 30% acrylic and 20% nylon. So it's a good, strong yarn. And on my lovely sock bag that Wendy made for me for Christmas, I have my 2 Crochet Luna buttons, pins. For those of you who are not aware, Crochet Luna is the internet brand of Claudia, who is from San Diego, California. She's a lovely person. I love her podcast. I've not been responding as much as I should to it, but I really enjoy watching Claudia. She and Ella on the No Catchy Name podcast are my 2 favourite crochet podcasts, and also the Cozy Cottage. So those 3 together are my favourite crochet podcasts, and then the Grocery Girls and the Stitching Sisters, Cozy Up with the Stitching Sisters, are my 2 favourite knitting podcasts. And I really enjoy listening to them as I'm working away and sharing little bits of their lives, and it's great fun. And so Claudia's badges were on sale in the States, but she has a UK distributor, so I've been able to get hold of them in the UK, which is simply more convenient rather than having to import from the States. It's so much easier for a distributor to import them en masse and then price them accordingly in the UK market. So that's I have. The third one was about females. So the first one says, let me just get my glasses on, pardon me a second. First one says, crochet friends are the best of friends, which I think we can all agree is absolutely true. And the second one is just the Crochet Luna symbol. And this is my British Red Cross, which for some reason is a red rose. But as I'm from Lancashire and also a member of the Labour Party, I'm therefore represented twice by my red rose. So I've done about an inch more on, maybe 3/4 of an inch more on there. And I have cast on in my Mrs. Brown's bag. I have my two Grocery Girls pins. So this is the Grocery Girls logo, which is their shopping carts filled with yarn balls, and their Sock Talk badge, which I just love. And inside there, I have a very early cast on. This is a Cozy Up with the Stitching Sisters design, which is their Triple Treat Shawl set. Sorry, Triple Treat Shawl set. I was going to make the asymmetric triangle. No, sorry, I was going to make the top-down triangle. Didn't like it, so ripped it out. So I thought, well, I'll try the asymmetric triangle. Didn't really like it, ripped it out. There's nothing wrong with it, it just wasn't, it wasn't grabbing me. I started on the crescent, and I'm actually quite enjoying the crescent, and I quite like the way it's looking. So I've not ripped this out, but because I've started it twice, 3 times, and ripped it out twice, I've not got a huge amount on the needles, but I do have some. So this, I've done the first lace section, which is very attractive because it's not simply regular eyelets, it's actually quite an attractive layout. The yarn I'm using is my Storm in a Cauldron colourway from, oops, there we go, got my pen in there. Purple Paw Yarns, which is on Instagram. She is Crafty Cat Knitty Bits, as you can see down below. And I love everything that she's doing. I've got some dyed roving from her that I'm spinning into my own yarn to use later. I've got them on my Knit Pro Zings, which I love using. Sorry, I've got that a little bit entangled. Let me just unentangle it. No, Bunty, you can't eat it, honestly. Cats and yarn never mix. Right, let's slide that off the needle and then it will stop being tangled. There we go. All nicely untangled. So yes, I really love I mean, Storm in a Cauldron, I think, absolutely sums this up. I love the purple and I love the teal. Those are my two kind of favourite colours at the moment, but they're interspersed with all the colours of the rainbow, which, you know, what's there not to love? And this is, I think, a 75-25. I'll just double check that. Glasses, it is on the bottom. It is a 75 superwash merino, 25% nylon, and it's a 4-ply, so fingering weight yarn, which is what the pattern calls for. So it's a single skein, single hank, single ball, single cake, however you want to describe it, shawl. So that will be very nice. I'm making that for somebody for Christmas, so I've got plenty of time to finish it, having started it 3 times, so that's quite nice. And then I've got one more work in progress, which is my Stephen West Savin shawl, which, if I can find a picture, there is one picture of it being modelled by the designer. He is a person for the most outlandish colour schemes and designs, but it's quite exciting, and that's so it's lots of short rows on this side to give the elongated side, whereas this side is just one half of a normal triangular shawl. So it's very asymmetric, but it keeps your interest, because every so often you do a line that goes all the way, a group of lines that goes all the way across in garter stitch, and then you have short rows which include eyelets and stocking stitch and so on. So I'm working on my 3rd set of colours. So it's a marled yarn. So I'm holding, this is the Malabrigo that I bought, or was bought for me as a late Christmas present many moons ago, and I have all the colourways, but yep, this is the Baby Silk Packer lace yarn. So it's 70% baby alpaca and 30% silk. And because it's lace weight, holding it together turns it to fingering weight. So it's a very nice, it's very soft and squishy, and the garter stitch makes it even more so. So you can see it started off as a normal triangular shawl, and then I did this short row eyelet stocking stitch section, and now I'm doing the garter all the way across, which is giving it this elongated asymmetric look, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a very simple, fairly mindless knit so far, in that for most of the time it's either stocking stitch or garter, which is, you know, fairly mindless. You're either knitting or purling, and there's a yarn over increase at the beginning of every row, and every other row, when you're doing the full width, there is you're making one right and left at the central stitch, and then obviously there's just the yarn overs for the lace in the middle. So it's a really nice simple construction, but it produces, with the colour changes and the marling and the difference in textures and the lace work, it's giving a really nice overall feel and texture to what's going on. So I'm really enjoying that. I think previously I've shown the first 2 sections. I've now more or less finished the garter section. I've just picked this up this week and started knitting on it when I was watching, what was I watching? Oh, I'll come to that at the end of the podcast, so stay tuned for that. So this is a really nice, fairly mindless knit. You just have to make sure you know which section you're in, and remember whether, I mean, there's going to be quite a few ends to weave in, but you're only breaking one at every colour change and then adding in a new one, because basically I think we started with AB and then did BC, and now we're on CD, and the next one is DE. So you're only ever changing one of the 2 colours at each colour change, so that's quite nice. Though that may change as I get further into it. And that's in my Mr. Foxy bag, which I really love. I love the colour, I love the characterisation of Mr. Fox and his dapper outfits. So that's my other whip, which I've not worked on for a little while, but I've started working on again now. So I'll just put those two there so I don't lose them. So I have also got some acquisitions. First, before I talk about the acquisitions, I want to talk about why I've got the acquisitions, if you like. One of the things that I'm loving at the moment are little amigurumi dinosaurs. So Let's Get Crafting is a magazine I subscribe to, and because I subscribe to them, I think actually this is available if you sign up for their newsletter as well. There are these adorable little dinosaurs. So there is, I think I'm right, that you have a brachiosaur, a triceratops, and a stegosaur. I think that's right. No, sorry, it's a brontosaurus, not a brachiosaurus. So yeah, so there's a brontosaurus, and then the triceratops and the stegosaurus with the plates on the back. And then I've also got a second set of dinosaurs, which includes a baby T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I think this is a Diplodocus, if I'm right. Let me just have a... Oh no, that's the Brachiosaurus, sorry. And then there is also a pterodactyl and another Triceratops. So I'm going to have some fun. I probably won't be using the specific colours they've used, although there's been a lot of research done recently which indicates that perhaps dinosaurs were not all green, scaly monsters, that quite a lot of them had feathers, either full-blown feathers similar to birds' feathers or very downy feathers, almost like fur, covering them. And that those feathers that have been preserved in the fossil record, and a lot of them, the pigment at the base of the feather has also been preserved and is identical to that which is found in modern birds, and from that paleoarchaeologists have been able to determine the colours of the feathers, including one little dinosaur similar to a velociraptor, but only the size of a squirrel, which was bright red like a fox, or like a British squirrel, the red squirrel would be, but with a raccoon-like banded tail. So they've been able to tell from the shape of the pigment fossil at the base of each of the feathers what the colour of the dinosaur probably was. So that's quite nice. But I took the opportunity of the reduced cost of the cotton yarns at Mason's to buy these two for some of the dinosaurs, so they will look like traditional dinosaurs of greens. I think probably I'll make the Stegosaurus in these greens, and maybe the pterodactyl as well. So I've got a couple of those, and I've also got a couple. So sorry, one you know about is the Lakiwa, which means honey apparently, which is the 60% linen. Sorry, 60% cotton, 40% linen. And this is Louise Harding, which is, I think, 100% cotton. Composition, 100% cotton, yes. And is a DK weight cotton, but it's got a very tight twist in it. So this feels much harder, and therefore I think will work better as the body of an amigurumi than it would as a wearable. Particularly, I know it sounds ridiculous to be making amigurumi out of cotton, but some people, quite like cotton toys and things, so I'm quite happy to do it, and because it was on sale I can afford to do it. This, together with the linen, will actually produce quite a strong result. And the other colours I bought, there is a second Louise Harding. So this is the second colour combination, which is this lovely purple in the same as the dark green. And then this, I'm not sure, is it a fuchsia? It's quite a pale, sorry, quite a deep colour, not bright, but it's a kind of fuchsia colour. And this is the 100% cotton, I believe. And waki is a Kukan word meaning sun rays. So there we are. Sorry, no, this is 85% cotton and 15% silk. But again, because of the silk content, is very strong as well. So I think the two of them together are going to really work quite nicely for some of the dinosaurs. So look out for those in future episodes. So that's one set of acquisitions. While I was in, I've forgotten where I've put it. I brought it over here and put it down, but I can't find it. So if you'll excuse me, I'll just have a drink of tea. That gingerbread is delicious. And now my equally hot. I can feel it's still hot in there. And I can see the steam rising as well. So that's really nice. So thank you for that, Claire. My second cup of tea is very hot still. Too hot to drink at the moment. Sorry, I thought I brought it over, but I can't find it. I'll talk about it next time. There's always the next time. So, while I was in Mason's, because I'm making some bags, I quite like to have a handle on my bags, similar to the Mrs. Brown's bag I have. So just a nice ribbon handle, because it's quite useful for carrying around, just putting your hand over and so on. So I bought 3 very nice polka dot ribbons in primary work with quite a wide range of different fabrics that I have. So again, it's not very expensive to buy ribbon, but it's quite nice to have some in stock for when you need it. I do have other ribbons as well, but this ribbon I found is just the right width and just the right kind of strength for making the handles. So I really quite like this as my kind of handle ribbon. And while I was in the Mason's wool shop with Wendy, because Wendy wanted some fabric and I wanted to buy the cotton linen to go with my cotton to make the cardigan. That particular branch of Mason's is also where the upholstery and curtain fabric is mostly sold. So in the Mason's fabric shop, it tends to be the lighter weight cottons and polycottons and chiffon and all that kind of material that's sold. And because most of their fabric is sold in larger quantities for things like curtains and upholstery, when they have remnants, for them a remnant is anything less than 2 or 3 meters, and they sell it at a very cheap price. So I walked in and this was actually in the remnant box, and I think when you see it you'll understand exactly why I bought it. It is a very beautiful fabric and it's a really nice quality of fabric as well. It's Fougere, I believe it is, by Oromo. Made in England, which is nice. Just trying to see if it's got a pattern. Oh yes, of course it has. Fuchsia, I've just said it. I should listen to myself sometimes before I speak. It's a very pretty pattern. So yeah, and it's a really nice thick cotton fabric. So it will make some really nice bags and maybe some cushion covers as well. So I'm hoping to really kick up a pace on making the bags. They don't take very long to make now, and I've got a couple of standard pattern sizes that I've made. I've worked out what works best for me. There is another finished object that I don't have to show, which is I made. Oh, it's there. Sorry. Ooh, pardon me. Sorry for getting so close to you there. I made a second bag out of the same materials for Nina. I put right all the little mistakes I made on this one, and I sent that to her as her prize for winning the summer make along, and she's received it. So that's all very good. It's nice to be able to send the prize to people. And I think, yes, behind me, after I'd sent the parcel, I found the cotton yarn that I'd actually bought as the prize. So I still have a prize. So maybe this will be part of a giveaway coming up to celebrate 600 subscribers. We're nearly there, so that would be quite a nice little prize for somebody. Or maybe I'll have another make along. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with that, but it's a very pretty. This is 100% cotton, and it's a chain construction, so it's very, very soft. I've noticed that chain construction in cotton tends to make it a much softer affair than just the plied cotton of the others. But the colouring, the yellow and the white together, just shouts summer to me, which was why I initially bought this as the prize for the summer make-along giveaway. It turned out that I found it the day after I sent the parcel. But there you go, that's life. So that is everything I wanted to show you that I've been working on, or that I've bought, or that I'm using at the moment. Apart from the one thing that I can't find, but which I'll talk about the next time. I was just wondering if I'd left it on top of anything. It's always possible. Ah, I found it. There it was next to me. So the filet crochet I've been working on, I thought this 1mm hook was the finest, and so the finest crochet I could do was really with this 1mm hook. I was wrong. There is actually a 0.6mm hook. So compared to the 1mm hook, it's tiny. I think it's that way around. Yes, so you can see it's a, if I get behind it, maybe you'll be able to see, I don't know. Can you see that that's a 0.6mm? So you can see that compared to the 1mm, the 6mm is this, 0.6mm is that one. So it will produce a much finer lace. You can use this with embroidery cotton. I have tried. It's very difficult to see where the stitches are when you're in the setup row. So I think probably what I'll need to do is, instead of doing a foundation chain, I will do a foundation treble crochet and just do the right number, because once you've actually got the treble crochets, it's quite easy to work out where the hook is supposed to go, but it's very difficult to see within the chain itself. So probably just a different setup technique is needed for that. But I hope to have some. I'm putting this filet crochet aside for a little while now while I work on my other projects. I've enjoyed the process, and I'm looking to make some pattern designs of my own. Nothing exciting, but it's not a difficult process to design patterns, so I will probably start making some patterns of my own to work on in filet crochet. But I just wanted to show you that you can actually go even smaller than a 1mm hook, so look out for that in the future. So that's everything in terms of crafting. So I want to talk for a little while about something that I know some people are going to have difficulty with, and for good reason, and I don't make any judgment about people who have a difficulty with this subject. June is Pride Month throughout the world, and the reason June is Pride Month is because 50 years ago this June there was the famous or infamous riot in New York City after a police raid on the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay bar and drag bar. And it's attributed or credited with kickstarting the gay liberation movement. Now, for some people that's a good thing, and for others it's a bad thing, but it is what it is. I'm not making any positive or negative statement about it, but it is the incident that led to the beginning of the gay liberation movement, at least in the public eye. This June 2018 is also 100 years since women got the vote in Britain. Admittedly, only women over 30, but it was the beginning of, and with certain property qualifications as well, but it was the beginning of the move towards universal suffrage, and in many ways is the first real success of the women's liberation movement. And that I mentioned the two in the same breath almost, because actually the two are not completely unrelated. In many ways, gay liberation and women's lib go hand in hand, because historically and theologically, it's certainly in terms of biblical theology, but also in terms of sociological view of homosexual men, is that a man who was homosexual was making himself, in the terms of the men who were running society, the patriarchy, if you like. I don't want to adopt feminist terminology wholesale, but it works. In a male-dominated society, men who behaved as if they were women, either because of their effeminate behaviour or because of their sexual practices, were making themselves no better than women and slaves, in a society where women in particular are considered to be property no better than a slave. And this is true, even though we have this view that the Greeks somehow tolerated homosexuality. They did to a very limited degree, but a man who allowed himself to be used in the way that a woman or a slave might be used sexually was demeaning himself and made himself, put himself beyond the pale of Greek society, of men. And so if gay men want to be, in particular, as Stonewall was a homosexual man, there was some lesbian involvement as well, but lesbians have had a less high-profile kind of campaign against them. I mean, for example, in the 19th century in Britain, Queen Victoria allowed male homosexuality to be criminalised, but wouldn't allow female homosexuality to be criminalised because women wouldn't do that kind of thing. I kid you not. And so the gay liberation movement has been particularly focused around the liberation of men from penal laws controlling their behaviours. And in order for gay men to be seen as equals to ordinary men, then the role that they play, either they're effeminate, not that every gay man is effeminate, but for those gay men who have an effeminate side, for that not to be considered less than, and for the sexual activity not to be considered less than, or making the man less than other men, you have to elevate the view that of women, the role of women. Women themselves have to be valued and treated as equals before you, as basically part of the same process. And this got me to thinking about, I was watching something on television. I can't remember what it was. And it was almost a throwaway comment that homosexuals can't be Christians. And I took real exception to that. There is a fundamental misunderstanding in the mind of someone who makes such a statement. And I wanted to read from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is the book I bought when I was at Ampleforth. And this is a very important book for Catholics. But I think it gives a very interesting insight into the view that the Catholic Church takes of homosexuality. Now, it does make the Catholic Church makes the very strong point that as far as it's concerned, at this moment in time, homosexual activity is sinful in all circumstances and therefore shouldn't be carried out. But to be of the homosexual inclination is just an identity and it concerns the effective maturity of the individual and isn't something that can be you can't be penalised for being more attracted to the same sex than to the opposite sex. And it so in there are only three paragraphs that actually refer to homosexuality, and two of them do refer to the need to be chaste, basically, that a homosexual person is called to chastity. So I'm not saying that one necessarily agrees with it or disagrees with it, but that's the statement of the church at this moment in time. And part of the reason for that is actually in the first paragraph. And it's more a definition of terms. Homosexuality refers to relations between men or between women who experience either an exclusive or predominant sexual attraction towards persons of the same sex. So far, simple definition. It has taken a great variety of forms through the centuries and in different cultures. Again, simple statement of fact, which is verifiable by evidence. Its psychological genesis remains largely unexplained. So those three sentences, I don't think anyone can take any significant objection to. It then goes on to say within that basing itself on sacred scripture and in the light of the fact that its psychological genesis is currently unexplained, the church finds homosexual behaviour to be contrary to the natural law of procreative sexuality. And that's a perfectly valid view to take. It doesn't make any long-term statement because of the caveats that are put in there. And then it goes on to say, the number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. They must be accepted. I've left something out, and I'm not going to go into the whole detail, but it goes on. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross any difficulties they may encounter from their condition. Which, is maybe pietistic to some extent, but that's the extent of what the church has to say on homosexuality. And it certainly doesn't go into any idea that homosexuals are eliminated from the Christian community because of their sexuality, and leaves open the door that should medical science, either through psychology or through neurobiology or through genetics and the human genome, discover the natural basis for homosexuality, and there have been significant movements within those medical sciences to help explain not just why human beings are homosexual, but why homosexuality appears in lots of different mammalian groups. Not just primates, but in cats and in dogs, not just pet cats and dogs, but in the wild, and large cats as well as small cats, and in elephants, for example, that there are homosexual tendencies that have been discovered in all of these animal groups and in some bird groups as well. We're at the very beginnings of our knowledge in these areas, but the church leaves open the idea that it will review its understanding of scripture based upon its understanding of the scientific world, which has been the constant, if grudging, position of the church, even in the time of Galileo and Copernicus. Within a century of the condemnation of Galileo, the Vatican has set up its own observatory in order to observe the planetary movements around the sun. It fully accepted the scientific findings of Galileo, just not in Galileo's lifetime, which is our biggest complaint against the church, is that it takes a long time for anything to actually change. The Catechism then quotes, as the underlying principle for this scriptural idea of homosexuality, several interesting passages. It quotes, or rather refers the reader to, Genesis chapter 19 verses 1 to 29, which is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It then refers them to St. Paul's letter to the Romans, St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and St. Paul's first letter to Timothy. All of which, where in the Bible, in translations of the Bible, all of them refer to not homosexuality, although that's the modern translation. They refer to sodomy. And sodomy, in scriptural terms, is any sexual expression that deviates from the norm, rather than just two men together, which is the more modern understanding of the word sodomy, which is why sodomy and homosexuality have become identified as one and the same thing in those passages of St. Paul. But St. Paul's original Greek doesn't refer directly to homosexuality. It refers more to the sins of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what I find very interesting is that the church completely ignores Leviticus. Most famously, when Christians or fundamentalist Christians are asked why they reject homosexuality, they say, if a man lies with a man, if a male lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall be put to death, their blood is upon them. That's Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13. Now, that's a very, very clear condemnation of a homosexual sexual act in the Bible, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church completely ignores it. And there might be a very good reason for that, because, you know, basically, this chapter in Leviticus is saying those men need to be put to death and their blood is on their own heads. Why might that not be a conclusive proof against homosexuality? Well, because chapter 20, verse 10, so just 3 verses before, if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbour, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. The man who lies with his father's wife, not necessarily his mother, but another wife of his father, if he's remarried or in early biblical times had several wives. If a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them, that is the man and his father's wife, shall be put to death. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. They have committed incest. Their blood is upon them. So, a fundamentalist Christian, if they are going to say that a homosexual man or woman cannot be a Christian, has to say at the same time that any adulterer, effectively, is the same. Leviticus makes no distinction. Those 3-4 verses of Leviticus are referring to sexual acts which, as far as Leviticus is concerned, deserves the death penalty. Now, obviously, we don't live in an Iron Age moral universe, and we have moved on rather with our view. But I think it very significant that if you are going to quote Leviticus, which, as I say, the Catholic Church doesn't quote Leviticus as the basis for its rejection of homosexuality as a valid expression of human sexuality, then I think you have to say that you also accept that adultery and incest with a non-blood relative is equally an abomination before God and deserves death. Puts the Christian outside the Christian community. And there aren't many Christian groups that would consider that these days, and for good reason. We have a more in-depth understanding of human sexuality and human psychology, and life is less brutal than it was 3,000 years ago. And that's not a bad thing. So all of that, I think, is fascinating. And I won't go into it now, but I may come back to it. It is fascinating that the Catholic Church uses Sodom and Gomorrah, and St. Paul uses Sodom and Gomorrah as the reason for his condemnation of homosexuality. But a careful reading of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is quite an in-depth subject, so again, I'm not going to go into it now, but may come back to it if people are interested and would like me to go into it in more detail, is that to give the headline, Sodom and Gomorrah is not about gay sex. Sodom and Gomorrah is about the abuse of hospitality, first and foremost, which is illustrated by the worst sexual act that the writer at the time imagined, which is the gang rape of men by the men of the towns. It's difficult to extrapolate from a story about potential gang rape to two individuals sharing a committed life together, such as modern homosexuals largely want to do. And that's what the whole gay marriage or not gay marriage debate really is about. So I think, you know, as I say, I could go into a lot more detail about Sodom and Gomorrah. I won't at the moment, but if you want me to, I'm more than happy to do so. And I'd be very interested to hear your comments. I raise all of this. Sorry, Bunty, what you want to sit on my knee? Okay. I raise all of this because I have two programs that I've been watching on Netflix while I've been recuperating. Sorry, there is a segue here. It will become clear. One of them is a Russian-produced historical drama called Sophia, and is about the Sophia Paleologus, who was the niece of the last Byzantine emperor. The Byzantine Empire was the Eastern Roman Empire. So when Constantine became emperor in the beginning of the 4th century, after the Battle of Malvern Bridge, in 312, I think it was, he is credited with the Christianization of the Roman Empire. And there is a great deal of debate as to whether he himself was a Christian. And his mother, St. Helena, is reputed to have rediscovered or brought out into the open, so uncovered, the locations of the sacred shrines of Christianity in the Holy Land. Because, of course, for a long time, Christianity was either a minority religion or was actively persecuted. Not so much in the 1st and 2nd centuries, not as much as people think, but certainly by the end of the 2nd and the 3rd century, it was very much a persecuted religious group. And so the communities hid away the knowledge of these sacred objects and the sacred places like Golgotha, the Holy Sepulchre, the cross itself, or the wood from the cross itself. And part of the revitalization of the empire involved moving the seat of the Roman Empire from Rome, which from that date on became Old Rome, to a little town called Byzantium, which was at the narrowest part of the Straits of Bosphorus, which is the waterway that leads from the Mediterranean to, I think, the Caspian Sea. It's either the Caspian or the Black Sea. I can never remember which way round they are. But anyway, it's a very significant waterway controlling... It's a very narrow part of the Bosphorus, and it controls the trade between the island, or the coastal communities of both seas. And so it was very significant. And he renamed it Constantinople after himself, and is modern-day Istanbul. Sorry, I couldn't think of the name of the place then. And so after the Roman Empire fell in the West, because not long after Constantine, the empire split into two, and there was a Western emperor and an Eastern emperor. And after the empire split into two and the Western Empire succumbed to the barbarian invasions, the empire in Rome continued on all the way through to 1453. So another 1,000 years, basically. And was called the Byzantine Empire rather than the Roman Empire, because in the West, after Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Empire was refounded. And that only ended in 18... 1813, Napoleon put an end to the Holy Roman Empire. So that lasted another 1,000 years from Charlemagne in 800. So both empires lasted 1,000 years on, but Palaeologus was the final Byzantine emperor whose brother was the tyrant of Moldova, I think, and Zoe Palaeologus was his daughter, and she was when her father died, she was raised in the papal court in Rome, and was married off to Ivan III of Russia, who was Ivan the Great. At that time, Russia was a grand principality, so he was the Grand Prince Ivan of Russia, of Muscovy, in fact. And when Zoe went to Moscow to marry him, she was rebaptized in the Russian Orthodox Church and was given the name Sophia. And her son, although Ivan had had a first wife and had a son through that, he married Sophia after his first wife died, and they had several children, and her eldest son became Prince of Russia, Prince of Muscovy, rather, after Ivan the Great. Vasilievich, I think his name was. Or Vasily. No, he was Vasily. He was Vasily Ivanovich, that's right. Vasily, son of Ivan. And their son, Ivan the Fourth, became Ivan the Terrible, more Ivan the Formidable, who was the first Tsar of Russia. And Sophia is credited with turning Moscow into the new Rome, so the Third Rome. So the first Roman Empire was the original Rome, the second Roman Empire was the Byzantine Empire, and the third Roman Empire is the Muscovy Empire. And that's why the Russian symbol is the double-headed eagle, which was the symbol of the Old and the New Roman Empire as well. And she introduced all of the court practices of the Byzantine court into the Moscow court, and eventually her grandson unifies the Russian states, defeats the Mongol hordes, and builds the Russian Empire that we know today. And this was a really good series, all the way through the first 9 episodes. It was funded by the Culture Department and the Defense Department of the Russian government, so it's obviously got quite a strong sense of Russian identity about it, and unfortunately is entirely in Russian or Italian, which means that I had to read the subtitles because I don't know Russian and I only know a little Italian, which meant I couldn't do very much crafting while I was watching because I was having to read. But it was a really enthralling series on Netflix until the final episode, when they basically rewrote Russian history. Which was, I'm not going to go into why, and it's not a bad ending, but it rather got the feeling that they had decided they were only making the 10 episodes, and so they spent 9 episodes dealing with the first 5 years of Sophia in Russia, and then condensed the whole of the next 20 years into the last episode, which was disappointing. I was disappointed at the end of the series because it had been so good for the first 9 episodes. And then suddenly, not only did they condense 20 years into an hour, they also rewrote Russian history. In a way, it's not that significant because the bits of Russian history they rewrote were not, in the end, significant, but they could have been, because they could have significantly changed the Russia that we have today. They didn't, because of other reasons. In particular, Ivan III's eldest son died just after his son was born, so Ivan's grandson, which meant that technically, Ivan III's heir was actually his grandson rather than his son by his second wife. And so there was a lot of political intrigue around the succession as Ivan got older, because Ivan was a good 20 years older than Sophia, because obviously he'd had a first wife and their son was basically the same age as Sophia. So she was much younger than Ivan III. And obviously, Ivan's son's wife and Sophia were engaged in political maneuverings in order to get their son as the next Grand Prince. And all of that was completely obliterated and ignored by this final episode. But had Ivan's grandson become Grand Prince, then Ivan IV probably wouldn't have been Grand Prince and first Tsar of all the Russias. So it would have had a profoundly different outcome than. And in fact, that whole political intrigue would have been a really interesting second series. They obviously decided they didn't want to make a second series, so they changed history and abruptly moved forward 40 years in the last episode. But beyond that, it was a really good series. So I thoroughly recommend that. That's on Netflix, and it's just called Sophia. But you do have to be able to read the screen. Unfortunately, it's not one you can sit back and listen to the dialogue. But the cinematography, the costumes, the sets are beautiful and really evoke the age and a different cultural background as well from usual Western costume dramas, because at that time Russia was on the very eastern edge of Western civilization and was as much influenced by Asian cultural norms as it was by, and probably more so than it was by Western European cultural norms. The other series, which relates back to the discussion on homosexuality and Pride Month, I have a number of gay friends, and I've never really been. I always find the more effeminate end of gay expression. I don't find it objectionable, but I find it tiresome a little. And I've been to a number of drag queen, light entertainment, cabaret kind of events at various pubs and clubs in my time. And I've always found drag to be a little bit misogynistic, that it's a very strong negative caricature of women, either the slut or the battle axe, if you like, and the bitchiness and all that kind of thing, and the overpronounced padding at various parts of the body. But I have enjoyed drag at the same time. Obviously, in Britain we have quite a strong tradition of the pantomime, dame. So a very obviously man dressed as a woman caricature, comedy caricature. So the ugly sisters, the evil stepmother, tend to be played by men dressed as women in the pantomime, and are there to be objects of ridicule rather than to impersonate women as such. But there are... Sorry, Bunty, you're going to have to move your claw out of my leg. Go on. I don't know why she does it, but she grips her claws right into my thigh. Anyway, thank you. For those of you in the UK, you may remember in the 70s and 80s a comedy double act of Hinge and Bracket, Dr. Evadne Hinge and Dame Hilda Bracket. And this was two gay men who impersonated women. They weren't drag as such in the sense of the exaggerated female. They were two men who played ladies of a certain age, clearly in their 60s, early 70s. So semi-retired or retired. And they had, in their heyday, in the 30s and 40s, been provincial light opera performers. Dr. Evadne Hinge was an accompanist on the piano, and Dame Hilda Bracket was the mezzo-soprano, if you like. And they were clearly from a well-to-do background, so genteel ladies living in Stackton Trestle somewhere in Suffolk. And the TV series was known as Dear Ladies. It was I really enjoyed it. It was very funny, and they were amazing impersonators because you actually forgot that these were two men playing women. And this was their stage act, and they would throw in the subtle double entendres and the slightly saucy but also completely innocent comments that, you know, would get a knowing wink or a laugh out of the audience, but, you know, not particularly strong. And I've always, as I say, when I've gone to drag performances in the flesh, there's a lot of that subtlety wasn't there. It was just crude and raw sexual language, and that's fine. I'm not a prude, and I'm not an innocent person. I don't find it objectionable to hear that, but it kind of, you know, it's not very clever and it's not very funny. So I've had quite a negative view of drag, but I was watching on Netflix, and it came up in my recommended to watch list, RuPaul's Drag Race. Now, I also, for those who, apart from Strictly, I'm really not keen on reality, so-called reality TV. I find it, and I think possibly I wasn't really treating RuPaul's Drag Race fairly, because the reason I like Strictly is because people learn and develop a skill that they then demonstrate. Whereas in most reality TV shows, it's all about vacuous non-entities being vacuous on television, and, you know, being stupid and saying stupid things or doing stupid things, and it's not really what I would call entertainment. You know, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here is just treating B-list, C-list, D-list celebrities badly for people's entertainment and to get a reaction out of them. And I just don't find that kind of thing interesting at all. Or Big Brother, which just takes a series of people who want to be famous for being famous and puts them into an unpleasant living situation so that they get on each other's nerves and have breakdowns and all kinds of flare-ups of anger and all the rest of it, just for the titillation and entertainment of the population. I find that all rather tedious. But I wasn't giving the contestants in RuPaul's Drag Race their due. These are artistes. They are, you know, the costumes and the makeup and the wigs and the persona that they project is, you know, it's a finely crafted art. And sitting down and week after week watching people, and yes, broadly quite effeminate men, not all, and that's an unfair, not that there is an issue, but as I say, I often find that quite grating, tedious, when it's full on all the time. You know, developing a rapport and an understanding of these men, and understanding that they're not being misogynistic, that drag differs from, if you like, blackface acting, in that blackface is simply a negative caricature of black people. Often. Usually. Al Jolson, who is the most famous or infamous blackface artist of the 20th century, was actually one of the most liberal performers. He did blackface entertainment in order to get black culture into the mainstream, because he employed black performers and is very much appreciated by the black performing community of his day for trying to get black entertainment into the mainstream. And he knew that initially he couldn't get black performers onto films and so on, because that was simply not accepted by Hollywood. So he had to become black using blackface makeup and perform black culture to a white audience, because they'd accept a white man doing that. He certainly wasn't using blackface in order to provide the nasty, stereotypical black minstrel gollywog style performance. I mean, just saying the word gollywog is such a horrible. It's not as bad as the N word, but it very nearly is as bad as the N word. And you know, it's easy to see drag as the same thing as a white person dressing up as a black person in order to caricature and ridicule race, but in the case of drag, in order to caricature and ridicule women. And then you realise that actually drag is not about a caricature of another group in society. It's about an expression of a person's sense of who they are from within. It's an alter ego for them, and is a loving craft. It's not intended to ridicule or to belittle. And in fact, much of drag attempts to project the strong side of womanhood, the strong feminine values of determination, tenacity, the willingness to speak your mind. I grew up in a household of a mother and 3 sisters and 3 brothers and a father. And my sisters and my mother were more than prepared to tell each other exactly what they thought, even if it wasn't particularly nice. And the men would be cringing and trying to back away out of the room while the women would just say exactly what they thought. And there is an honesty in that approach, and you see it in a lot of dramas, women trying to get men to say what they really think, but men, we're cowards at heart, and when, you know, we don't like to confront those emotions and those feelings, so we kind of pretend, oh, everything's fine, it's all right, and we mumble about something that isn't really true, and we certainly don't want that kind of full on. And yet my mother and sisters would have these full-on frank conversations where you'd think, oh, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that, don't look at me, don't get me involved in this conversation. And then they'd be as nice as pie to each other afterwards. And I don't understand that. It's just not who I am as a person. But I've witnessed that in a number of women that I've lived with and been close to. This willingness to be, you know, quite frank and tell the truth, even if it's not a nice truth. You know, even if it's going to be difficult to receive, they will say it. And sometimes they'll say it in a quite a bitchy way, but no, not all the time, and certainly not most of the time. It would be said just because it's the truth. And it would be received as the truth as well. It wouldn't be received as a, huh, how dare you say such a thing. It's, yeah, well, what about this kind of thing. Anyway, I'm slightly diverging from the point. But the point is that I think it's been a revelation to me. And how all of this kind of fits back together is it's important that the people who were at the forefront of the Stonewall riots, and why it's such a significant moment in history for the gay liberation movement, were particularly drag queens and black gay men, and black drag queens in particular. And the reason why that's a significant moment is that a white gay man can assimilate much more easily into mainstream society. We're accepted because we're white, we're accepted because we're male, and so we can melt into the background and we can stay in the closet and we can not be on the forefront. But a drag queen, a transvestite, a transsexual, a black man, a black gay man, a black drag queen in particular, everything about them is public and external. And so it just stopped briefly. And so they can't hide. And so they have to project and protect who they are. Their face is public all the time. There is no hiding from who they are. And so it becomes part of the same civil rights issues as female liberation, as black power, and civil, voting and equality, 14th Amendment equality rights, and all the rest of it in the Civil War period and post-Civil War period. They're all tied up together because it's about having a sense of who you are as a person and simply being that person. Anyway, so that, I think, is... I've got to an hour and a half, which is the longest podcast I've ever recorded. I hope I haven't upset any of you with the topics. I know that they're delicate topic conversations, But I also know that the crafting community is a very positive and welcoming community. It's a nurturing community. We do things for love of other people and for love of creating beautiful things. And so I hope anyone who may have difficulty with what I've been talking about can accept at least the spirit in which it's given. And as I say, I'm more than happy to hear your comments in the down below and go further into some of these subjects if that is wanted at some point in the future. So as I say, I think for now that's everything. I probably won't podcast at the weekend, so it'll probably be the mid to the end of next week for the next one. So we're roughly on 7 to 10 days, I guess, at the moment. I will get that back down to 7 days eventually, but I need to have enough to show you, because there's not much point me talking about nothing in particular, although I'm very capable of talking about nothing in particular. So on that, eventually, after 2 minutes more prevarication, I will wish you farewell and speak to you next time. So until then, stay happy, stay well, stay safe, and keep crafting. So bye for now.